So good morning. It's really good to see you, and I'm very happy to be online from Vancouver, Canada, where the winter is coming, but it won't be very cold, I hope. Today, I am going to talk very briefly about interprofessional education with students at this time when the world is experiencing such a terrible pandemic. And I think what is very clear from what is happening in my university and what I hear from universities elsewhere in Canada and at least in high income countries is that what I call the learning dial is being moved. What is happening is that the role of the educator, and we are educators, the role of the educators is being redefined. Now, what I should say immediately is that this is causing enormous problems for professors and teachers. There is no doubt that the emotional toll of moving almost entirely from teaching in a classroom to teaching online in an extended capacity is incredibly hard. And I think that one of the big issues that we will face in the next few months, and we are facing it partly now, is how we are going to deal with the emotional problems that are being caused by this redefinition of our roles as educators. So what we've come to see is that an educator who holds a lot of knowledge and who in a traditional classroom would be imparting wisdom to our students, that's no longer what we would say fit for purpose. That is not sufficient for what it is that we are confronted with as we are trying to overcome the barriers to learning that our students face. We also have to recognize that students are able to access knowledge and even learn a technical skill with just a few clicks on their phones, on their tablets, and their computers. So knowledge is distributed in a much bigger way than it was prior to COVID. And as we redefine the role of the educator, we have to be aware of how much of that information we can give students to access without us having to teach them in the way that we traditionally taught them. So I think that what we need to do is to move to the role of facilitator of the development of interprofessional skills rather than a direct teacher, because we are putting our students into small working groups online where facilitation is needed in order to have them learn what it is we want them to learn about working interprofessionally with other health and social care professionals. And I think that as we move this learning dial and develop these interprofessional skills, the pandemic is requiring two essential components. One of them, which we all know, and we use this word all the time, is resilience. The resilience that is necessary now is, I think, an order of 10 bigger than it was when we were teaching in a traditional way. And secondly, we have to be able to adapt almost daily to changes that occur because we notice something is not working in our teaching and something new is coming with the technology. So resilience and adaptability are incredibly important. And I've used a description at the bottom here, which describes resilience as having strength. You know, how do we bring that to our students so that they feel that they can do this? Because it is a huge demand. How do we give them confidence that what they're doing will really move this dial towards interprofessional practice? And then how do we motivate them to move as these adaptations are called for every day? And then how do we give them assurance that they can protect themselves from other things which might impose on them unreasonable demands? And we have to be really careful, and I will come to this in a moment, that we don't expect of students who are learning online the exact same responses as we would get if we were teaching in a classroom. We know that resilience requires a huge amount of effort, and that effort, of course, changes. It changes with the demand that we're making at a particular time. And then, of course, resilience also demands that we're fairly agile. And you know, academics are not always the most agile people because we are the keepers of knowledge, we are the generators of knowledge, and sometimes it takes us a long time to move from A to B to C. So agility, these characteristics of resilience are essential with adaptability as we move this learning dial. And when we think about adaptability, what we're thinking about is creativity. How do we think differently about what it is we're presenting? And then how do we present it differently? When we're doing it on a screen, as opposed to a blackboard or a screen in a classroom. How do we effectively communicate what it is that we are now trying to do in this different format? Because it's very different when you have a group of students in a classroom where they can just put up their hand and say, but what about? And then having them on screen, perhaps in a chat room where it's not effective or efficient to be able to put up your hand. So we have to really figure out what effective communication should look like. And then how do we work on collaboration? Because we all know in the interprofessional world that collaboration is a key to what it is that we're trying to do to change health systems and health and social care systems. And then just empathy. You know, there are days when I know my faculty friends are just totally worn out, and yet our students are fairly worn out as well. So we have to be empathetic and understand that we can't show, you know, our worn outness, because that gets in the way of feeling for our students this empathy. Yeah, it's okay, it's going to work. And of course, this pandemic requires that we're able to work across demographic lines of difference. Age is really, really, really important to get a handle on. And then professional lines of difference. You know, all of those scopes of practice which professions have so carefully erected are being eroded as we recognize we don't have enough health and social care workers in the system. So we had better begin to smooth out some of those lines between the different professions as seen in their scopes of practice, so that we can, as we move across those demographic and professional lines, we can in fact harness this power that we know is inherent in interprofessional collaborative teamwork. And finally, in this pandemic, we have to concentrate on what is being called relationship-based care, by which I mean we have to bring the patient into the learning process in a very new way. So let me give you a very brief example. In Canada, we have something called the Patient Voices Network. Now, you may, in your countries, also have something like this, but our Patient Voices Network is a large number of patients who come together to talk about how they might help to change the healthcare system. And now that we can no longer put our students into clinical settings, the patients are coming, the really good ones are coming to us and saying, but why don't you get us into the classroom? So this notion of relationship-based care, where we actually bring the patients in and make them part of the teaching environment where they are facilitators and mentors. Very important during this pandemic time. And we have to remember that this emergency remote learning, as we're also calling it, because it is remote, but how long it'll be emergency remote learning, it may be permanent, but let's just call it, is aimed at the definition of interprofessional education. We have to remember that we're trying to get students to learn with, from, and about each other. So that means, thinking about how do you do case-based learning. We have to remember that the reason we're doing this is because we really want to improve collaboration. And we all know that adverse events happen in the health and social care systems because of poor collaboration and always because of poor communication. So learning with, from, and about each other to enhance the collaboration, and then ultimately the goal of the interprofessional collaborative practice is to improve the quality of care and the quality of services. And in this time of the pandemic, improving the quality of care is hugely important, as you all know. And as we try to improve the quality of care, we notice that we have to improve the services. So we just have to think about PPP, masks, et cetera, and say, oh, we didn't do the right thing in stocking for this pandemic. So aiming at the definition as we're looking at the learning is really, really important. Now, there are some caveats, there are some big picture issues. We kind of think that our students know everything that they need to know about technology, even if they are the digital natives, like my grandchildren who are now in their 20s, who kind of grew up with this as your children are or grandchildren are. And we kind of think, oh, they know everything about it. But we have to recognize that they don't know everything about it. And one of the things that we're learning at my university, and I'm sure you're learning in your university, is when you introduce a platform like Teams, Microsoft Teams, or Zoom, students have to learn how to use that effectively with our guidance, and of course with their guidance, how we can improve it. Because they will access the internet on their phones, and on their laptops or whatever, but we have to recognize they may have very limited data. We know that in my country, that not every student has unlimited data or really fast access. And we have to recognize that we can't ask them to do things when they have to reserve the data capacity they have. And this is a huge issue. Our university, I'm a member of our university senate. Last night, we were having a report on the amount of money that we're putting into recognizing this particular issue. The issue of how much data does our teaching need in order for it to be effective, and can students afford it, etc. And we have to recognize also that many of our students are sharing their technology with other household members, because at the time when, working at home is everywhere, it may well be that those students have had to say, hey, I don't have everything available to me today technologically that I would like. And attached to that, when you live in a household where somebody else, or maybe two people or more than two, are also trying to access the internet, they may have less time to do academic work. So it's unreasonable to think that, we can actually pile more onto them just because they're now working at home and they're working with technology. They may not have that amount of time. And then a couple more big picture issues. We have to recognize this loss of connectedness for students. In our normal pre-COVID environment, our students were always connected with each other. They knew they could go for coffee, or they could have a meal, or they'd be in the dormitory, or they'd be in a clinical setting. And so they were connecting with each other. And that's really, really difficult when you are online. That human connectedness is something that we know our students are mourning at the moment. They're sad about. And that sadness can lead to all kinds of mental health problems. So as we recognize this loss of connectedness, we have to be prepared to put in place mental health supports that will help them through this period of learning in a new way. And as I've said, we have to develop and build this co-learning with a patient, a client. And that's a huge issue at the moment because we're just at the beginning of trying to figure that out. One thing that we've learned is that we have to ask for constant feedback on the system from our students and also from our faculty members, but from our students, we have to say, is this working? Is it working today? Did it work yesterday? Will this work tomorrow? So it's really important to keep getting the feedback. Oh, do you know, Dr. Gilbert, that really, we couldn't do what you were asking us to do. We just don't have the mechanism for doing it. So the feedback is really important if we want this to succeed. And then we have to have very flexible approaches in our instructions, the instructions that we're giving our students, the expectations we have of them, not giving them a ton of things to do, knowing that maybe they can do 2/3 of that. And then the objectives, realizing that perhaps some of the objectives that we might have had pre-COVID in a course are really not realistic at this time. And one of the issues that has come up in my university, and I'm sure in yours, is how do you go about deferring a grade? What if a student is unable to be online at a particular time so that we have to push back the deadline for the completion of the task? These objectives we have to look at. They're very, very important to get clear. We've heard from our students, and you probably have been hearing from your students, consistent communication. Please don't send us 16 different messages from 5 different offices. Centralize the communication and make sure that it's always consistent. If you have something to tell us, give us one person that's going to tell us that. Don't tell 16 different people to give us the message. So centralizing consistent communication, huge issue. And then using pertinent online tools. Don't use tools that are they really look lovely, but they don't work. And when we use online tools, make sure they're consistent from program to program to program. So our university chose Zoom, for example, as its platform. But I, as some of you know, work with a university in India that chose Microsoft Teams. So what we have to be sure is that with our entire community of learners, the university that we're in, the college that we're in, that there's a consistent use of an online tool, because that also confuses students and makes things really, really difficult. What we've discovered is that our students really want to have regular online office hours, just as we did pre-COVID. That is, we have to tell them, I can be available during this time for you to dial me in, call me up about whatever it is that's bothering you. It's really important that they know that that support link is with there. And then finally, I think we have to be very careful about drowning our students in emails. Remember, we're teaching the one course, we're not their only teacher. They have other courses that they're taking, and those teachers are sending them emails. So we have to be very careful that we just don't pile on emails and say, oh, now what about this, what about, because they are getting huge numbers of emails. So we have to avoid drowning the students in emails. So finally, let me just leave you with this thought of Henry Ford, because it really, I think, captures interprofessional learning and interprofessional practice. Coming together is a beginning. So we are coming together now around this entirely new way of learning and teaching. Keeping together is progress. So we have to make sure that we are holding this, and moving it together. And then working together, everybody that's engaged is working together, because that will assure success. We are in a very, very, very tough time, and our students and our faculty members are under enormous stress. So anything that we can do, anything that we can learn as teachers to make this whole experience that we love, you know, that's why we are teachers. We love it. Let's make it less stressful and make it more meaningful in this funny environment we live in. Thank you very much for your attention. It's been such a pleasure to be online, and I'm very happy to be at the fourth of these technical meetings, having been right there from the first. Thank you.